All right, with us today on the Return on Intelligence podcast, we have two of our very own machine learning engineers here to give us a peek behind the curtain on real projects and what they're seeing coming for this year. So first off, one of the things you guys mentioned to me, Jurgis, was why compute and data are the real AI bottlenecks. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, initially when the whole AI and LLM thing kicked off, we started with GPT 3.5. We could go even earlier because there was GPT-2 that some people played around, but it was very early versions of it. And initially with 3.5, right now, we're used to asking ChatGPT any question and it kind of answers, and you have to double check if that makes sense, but it would answer that properly. But with 3.5, it was kind of gimmicky, and quickly we realized that if you don't provide it additional data and context, it will just hallucinate and tell you nonsense and essentially come up with non-existent facts and information that would look right, but well, it's not actually right. So that's where the retrieval augmented generation architecture came in, and that's where we also quickly realized that if you don't get good data, then well, you're not going to get good answers. And there's a really old saying in machine learning and AI that garbage in, garbage out, and that still applies to AI and LLMs. And even with these better models, we have GPT-5, we have Gemini 3, and all of those great models that are, they look perfect, but you still need to add additional context. You still need to make sure that it's good. Otherwise, you're going to get the same results as you would with 3.5.
And so how does compute, you mentioned the data part. So if you get that bad data, I'm going to ask you in a little bit about how people can confirm their data quality, but the compute side of things, why is that in the conversation?
Well, essentially, compute was really relevant with early models. Right now, we have them cheaper, faster, and much better. But if you, for example, take image processing, right now we have some projects running image processing on the newest model, and that takes up to a minute. And we have to do that because our images are not clear. If you drop down to the earlier model, to 4.1, that immediately gets you to 10 seconds per image rather than 1 minute per image. So that's immediately an improvement towards efficiency, towards cost, towards compute, just because you make sure that your images that you're using are of high quality and of actual important image information rather than just a general view of things.
Yeah. Now, Vitalijus, talk to me about this single interaction with users. I know something we talk a lot about on this podcast is economics and making sure it actually makes financial sense to do what you want to do. Talk to me about this.
Oh, absolutely. This is a very interesting point because exactly how Jurgis has said, right now we're getting like a lot of new models. You can really read in the news that like every week we have a new killer, new AGI, like the model which killed GPT, like something. But very important thing is that the fact that the new model surpassed the previous one by 0.5% on the benchmark, it truly has zero influence on your business use case in most of the scenarios because it's not that relevant. But like still everyone is talking about the models, but limitation is not in the architecture at this point because there are like a lot of great models right now. They're really peaking. But the important thing is that GPT-5 won't fix your data warehouse. And even if you have like GPT-6 tomorrow, the real question is like, would your data even let you use it? Because everyone is hoping for like that Swiss knife which will come and solve all the problems, but like it's not happening. And like even if it's able to do some multitasks, it comes at the computation price. And in general, yes, models tend to get cheaper, but still those are enormously huge models. And as this is a text input models, you can try to use it to solve a lot of problems which they are not intended to be solved in the first place. So you try to solve your dirty, bad data by using very expensive models. Yes, sometimes it can do it, not always reliably, but it comes at a huge cost. And I think one very interesting use case we have had with one of our clients, it was like a chatbot. They already had their like proof of concept. It was answering questions based on their like internal data, so structured, unstructured data. It was working relatively good, but the problem was it wasn't scaled yet. And when we looked into the cost, the single interaction costed more than $1. And latency was bad, and like the single interaction was like around $1, which for proof of concept, that is okay. But in their use case, the monthly subscription for the user was $10. So you're at scale, that's not innovation, that's bankruptcy. I think that's a very important point, that right now, like the companies which succeed with AI are the ones who are optimizing, but not brute forcing everything with the latest huge model, because even so, they are good at reasoning. I mean, you need a different setup for each and every task, because like one very old concept in machine learning is divide and conquer, and that's what we have right now. You can't throw like all the problems in a single very expensive model and hope that it will work. Maybe it will work, but it won't work consistently, and it's going to be very expensive for you. That's why when we build projects, there is evaluation is one of the biggest parts in it, because sometimes you can have a lot of different providers and setups for each and every atomic part of your system. We literally had a system where we worked with 3 different providers and used 16 different models for input output, because while we started with a single model, and yes, on the paper it was working with a single model, but it was not performing good enough. But by splitting it into ridiculous 16 different parts, it became actually cheaper and way more reliable.
For someone who is non-technical, when I say, okay, I'm just going to send this to Gemini 3, it sounds super exciting. Like, oh man, Gemini 3, that's amazing. I take this data, send it to Gemini 3. And when you come along and tell me 16 different models, I start to cry on the inside, because now I'm like, I don't even know the difference between what Gemini 3 does and what these 16 different models do. Jurgis, how do you measure this output?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because also when this kicked off a few years ago, everyone was just doing it. There was no evaluation metrics to go on with, because in machine learning and in AI, you have very specific metrics for each thing you do. If you're trying to predict a number, you have your regression metrics. You have your metrics that tell you how close your prediction was to the actual thing. You have what we call a test data set, which contains all the correct answers to the problem that you're using to solve. And with LLMs, how do you measure whether the answer is correct or not? If you ask me an open-ended question, it could have a few correct answers, or it could have different ways of actually spelling out that answer, even though every answer is correct. So what we do is we build evaluation suites, which essentially is the same data set where we ask our clients to, hey, tell me the top use cases and give me questions and answers for each use case. And then we just run those questions, and then we just see if the model answers them correctly. And based on this evaluation suite, you can tell that, let's say, GPT 5.2, the best model that there is, has an accuracy of 92%. We can add more metrics, but I won't go into details on that. And then you run Gemini 3 and you see, okay, for this, overall accuracy is 97%. But then you can categorize it. You can say, one client was measuring different types of products and the quality of answers for each type of product. It could be cars, it could be tires, I don't know, beds, you name it. And then you categorize that. And then you can see for cars, we have 95% accuracy. For beds, we have 50% accuracy because, we need to do improvement there. And the same goes for different models. Additionally, you can you have different use cases. You could have an image-based use case, and we had a lot of projects work with OCR. So you would scan a PDF and look at the text and analyze that text. And we realized at some point that we can just use image processing with LLMs there. And then you test it, and then you see, okay, Claude is the best there. Don't quote me on that. It might have changed, but at that point in time, Claude was the best model there. And all of these metrics, all this evaluation suite discrete runs with different models with different category metrics and things like that help us identify the best model for the job. In the end, you just run and look, and that's also a great metric to just see for yourself, essentially.
On LinkedIn and Twitter, I always see these tables, especially when the Gemini or a new model comes out, it always shows these evaluations. And it sounds like what you were saying is internally, you need your own evaluation suite rather than looking at these benchmarks for things you don't care about. What does it look like across your product categories or your queries? That's really interesting. That brings up the importance of having AI and ML engineers, right? These small things, because on your own, when you type into ChatGPT, you're not going to be able to use 16 different models across a workflow. You have to get someone involved in that. But you guys have mentioned to me there's this skill gap. And even though online it's saying, hey, engineers are irrelevant, it sounds like skilled engineers are still in high demand. Vitalijus, what is this about?
So, unpopular opinion, and it a bit contradicts what's very frequently talked right now, is that AI didn't flatten the skill curve, it actually stretched it. And this is due to the reason that AI is not replacing engineers, it's actually amplifying their baseline. So what we have right now, that good devs now deliver, I mean, we hear very frequently 10x engineers, 1000x engineers. This is debatable how much faster you are, but like for sure, if you have a good baseline, right now you're way more productive than you were before because you can really support yourself using these models. But on the other side, like, yes, you can be 10x faster, but it means that weak devs now create 10 times more spaghetti code because speed without judgment, it's a liability. Because right now you have way less filtering than before because previously you needed more preparation, more hands-on work. And now you're literally few sentences prompt from generating the entire app, which is from one way, this is very cool. If you're a non-coder, this is amazing. But from production perspective, there is someone that has to judge you. And the problem is that people who want to vibe code prompt, there are, increase in this amount of people is way bigger than in these people who actually have a baseline and who can judge the code. And that's the problem because now we have like this part like really growing and this part is not growing that fast because like for various reasons. First of all, because it takes time to prepare engineers. Plus, it's getting a bit less popular because, all the news talking about code is being dead and stuff. And like people get demotivated to go on, through the classical path. But the issue, I mean, not the issue, but the thing is that the number of technical problems arise because if you would be looking into data science and machine learning 10, 15 years, even 10 years ago, it was way more niche. It was something that only like very technical companies were tackling. If you're gonna look right now, even like checking our clients, it's so random. It can be like elevator company, it can be, flight company, it can be, it's everyone wants it because like the technology level allows to use ML in most of the domains right now. So the demand is at its peak for various reasons, but the amount of people who can actually implement it is not getting higher or getting higher way slower than the demand. And the general problem is that new engineers, they trust the model too much. They take things for granted and only people with previous experience, they distrust it in the right places. But for people who haven't coded without the LLMs, it's like a cheat code on the exam. I mean, your brain stops working because you just, it generated, you just run it. This is a huge liability because yes, coding benchmarks are getting better, but like what we have seen is that if you ask it to code something in old framework, which was there 10 years ago, it's gonna do a relatively decent job in some use cases, but you're really gonna struggle if you're gonna ask to work with something which was launched like a year ago. Because the thing is, LLMs, they didn't learn to code, they were manually fine-tuned by people to solve some tasks. So yes, if you're gonna ask the latest Gemini model to code you chess, it's gonna do brilliant. But like the code for chess was there like 20 years ago, like in the public domain. But the problem is if you're gonna ask it to write something on new framework which was like released half a year ago, it's gonna totally improvise. It's gonna create you way more mistakes than that you like. If you don't have enough experience, you're not gonna be even able to solve. And usually it's gonna be way faster for you yourself to go into documentation and write it on your own than actually ask LLM model to write it for you.
I think two things I hear. One, it reminds me of when social media marketing became a thing and every company became a media company. So now whether you were a chiropractor or a data science firm or just your local coffee shop, you had to figure out video, images, copywriting. And at first the owner's like, oh, I could just do it myself. And then eventually they end up hiring these agencies and people for that role. It sounds like the same thing is happening where every company is a machine learning company. Every company is an AI company. And now they're like, okay, let me just build this myself. I'm just going to do it. And then it sounds like those symptoms that they start to see, oh, the copy doesn't look that good. There's a lot of hallucinations. This is costing me way more money than I was hoping. These are those signals that show that, okay, hey, the vibe coding cousin that you have or your nephew who knew how to use Lovable probably isn't going to cut it for your actual business. And I like that you referenced, if you're just playing around, you want to build a chess game for fun, cool. But if you're running an actual company in production environments where customers or employees are going to be using this solution, you need something you can trust. And these recent libraries sound like the way you've been testing these new engineers to see if they actually know what they're talking about.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting points because it's very hard right now to perform interviews because, I mean, people tend to screen share, do stuff, and like you can ask most of the theoretical questions by just using ChatGPT. But like we do have online coding tasks like with the screen share, and like one of the things which is really surprising, I haven't like no one from us has expected it, that we give you some tasks which are, I mean, really trivial. If you can just Google, use your brain, this is like a 15 minutes task. Like honestly, nothing crazy. From all of our interviews, I feel like, I don't know, like more than 90% fail with it. And from the people who have used LLM support to solve this, not a single person has solved it because they just, every time you throw these tasks at LLM, it just creates another task, which they again throw at LLM to debug it. And it's just like a rabbit hole. And every time it creates just like more and more and more like issues. And really so far, we've discussed it some time ago. It has passed few months and we still don't have a single person who was able to solve these super basic tasks just by using, code interpreter, Git support, like you name it. It's just not working.
Wow. And I think you had mentioned to me, it's like having the answers in your pocket to an exam and then someone asking you the question. It's like, how could I not just go? The LLM is an addiction at this point.
Oh, absolutely. Because that's exactly, like you see that the code is failing. You literally, if you would just read what the error says, you could solve it on your own in like 5 seconds. It can be as simple as, like a variable name because you just mistyped something. But instead of literally reading, that in the error log, it gets thrown into Cloud. You wait for 5 minutes. It actually finds, 6 other different related problems and you start solving that instead of like using what was failing like in the first hand. And like we've seen it too many times, honestly, like really too many times we've seen it.
We've done a lot of episodes on security. We've talked about ChatGPT agent mode, how big of a security risk that is, but you guys actually flagged to me, there's other things I hadn't even heard about before in terms of security vulnerabilities. Jurgis, can you talk to me about some of the things that people should be aware of that are coming?
Yeah, well, there's the regular ones that I feel like everyone at this point realizes, but it's good to mention, is just don't provide LLMs with access keys, with sensitive information. There was this case of somebody leaking company documents. I think it was like a microchip company which guards their secrets incredible. Or was it Samsung? I don't remember. But the document was leaked and then the model was retrained and then people started getting answers on their technical secrets. Ridiculous things like that. Because as much as you try to protect the system from leaking prompts, every new model has a website that lists all the jailbreaks to let you know how to make illegal drugs, to whatever you want if you just type it, the prompt. It's getting better, but eventually it has all the information that you give it. And if somebody is good enough, they will extract that information from you. So it's really important to design the system in a way that you don't give it the information that you don't want to be shared. If you have access keys, you wrap it around different methods to essentially avoid giving the LLMs information that you need. Because your prompts, if somebody wants, it will be leaked. There's really nothing that you can protect from there apart from designing the system that each part is limited to only the information that you have. Going into more details, you don't provide the system with access to your system. You isolate the essentially the chat agent or the interaction from the rest of the system, so that your information only gets passed through a very narrow channel. That, if you have a connection to the database, if you need a connection to the database, your system should only see the answer to the question, but not the entire database information and the code and the ability to run the code to get that information, and so on and so on. So it's really isolating things from the system.
It sounds like you're connecting. We talked about the deterministic. You're separating the deterministic part from the non-deterministic, because we know that traditional software engineering, even though it does have its vulnerabilities, it's significantly less than like an agent taking it and then sending it to the public domain. You mentioned this narrow window and the separation. How does someone look at doing that if they're looking at building an AI solution right now?
Well, it's the same principle. It's divide and conquer. So we are, for example, if you were to design a system that has access to your database, and you need an agent that generates SQL queries. So that agent should be fully internal. It shouldn't be able to chat to your users. It should only work as, generate a query, run the query, return the answer, or, not even the results of a database, but, you can tell it in the prompt that, hey, you will get this data, just answer based on the input question that you got. And then based on this, you connect this agent that only gives an answer, it's like sentence or two. You connect this part to the agent that actually interacts with the user. And then if the user asks, give me all the information on the database, the database agent will not be able to provide that because you had internal securities there. And then, finally, just don't let it run it. Always add a limit of the things that you can run to the database. Treat it as a junior employee that can always delete the database, and just limit it from accessing all of the information that somebody might leak.
And you might have actual junior employees using an internal system. I think we tend to, even the language online tends to be a lot around external consumer facing solutions. But even that angry junior employee who isn't happy and is leaving, give me all data on the way out the door. You need to make sure they can't do that. Yeah. It sounded like when I heard the divide and conquer originally, it was about quality. I know we did a writing solution where we allowed a lot of different LLMs to produce different parts of it. But now it sounds like the security part, that's just another reason why you want to use this divide and conquer process, which I know a lot of engineers know about, but the people who might be listening to this who are non-technical, that's something you can do regardless of what tool or vendor you're using. Speaking of people who are listening to this, adopters, we kind of hinted at there's this gap widening amongst engineers, but also amongst companies of people who are like still in those AI pilots versus people who are scaling into solutions. Vitalijus, talk to me about that.
I think this is a very interesting point from the perspective that it's a little bit different to the classical software engineering where you're doing like a ready to go tool, and usually it's like it's already good and you don't change it too much. So in terms of machine learning, it's you ship, you learn, and then you improve. So AI in most of the use cases is really a compounding advantage. So it's still like a lot of research and development, even if you're working like with the LLMs, and you can't A/B test AI strategy from the sidelines. So it really doesn't matter how good your consultants or your team are, you will still gonna do mistakes, and you will still need to go the hard way of learning of what's your data, what are the outcomes, how this should work. And there is only one way to figure this out. You can't expect that there's going to be like a new models coming, which you're going to deploy in 1 hour and it's going to solve all of your problems. Like the general approach is like always iterative, and no companies are shipping early AI systems aiming for perfection. It's really just leverage, just to get more data, to understand where your gaps, to understand where you struggle and try to improve based on it. Because without having baseline results, you can't really plan everything ahead. It's literally you can only learn that like from practicing. So AI always improves and in loops. So you learn, you get better products, you get more data, and then you get even better like AI. That's like the only way how you can do. You can't expect of getting data for 5 years and then launching your model. That's not how it works. You need to make it, step by step. It's a compounding interest.
Now, what are some of the things they can add? You mentioned these things like getting better. I know if I use ChatGPT to do some data analysis, it's not really getting better? It sounds like these come from custom workflows, or even it could be innate in Zapier, adding memory, whatever. What are some of these things that they need to make sure they have? Is it memory? Is it fine tuning, reinforcement learning? There's so many words. Which ones matter?
I mean, that's a lot of different approaches. It really very strongly depends on your use case only. So if you have a problem, you try to solve it with the baseline solution and hope for the best. Maybe just throwing your problem at a single LLM is already good enough, and you're the lucky person who, can deploy everything, and that is it. But very frequently you're going to discover that, okay, I can cover 70% of my use cases, I need something else. And then, like, for example, you're going to need an example of a chatbot. Just as an example, okay, we can start, okay, we need like customer support chatbot. You can start with the most simple baseline, single LLM. Inside of the prompt, it has frequently asked questions. Question comes, it answers. Super easy, like, few hours of work and you have it. And maybe if your knowledge base is small enough, like, that's already good enough. You don't need anything else. You launch it, but then you see that actually your users are asking something inappropriate. And if they ask something inappropriate, you can get banned, for example, from OpenAI. So you're like, okay, I need actually guardrails because they are disrupting my work and they're spending money that they're not paying for. So you're adding the guardrails. After that, you've added the guardrails, you mitigated this problem, but you see that when the questions are vague, like, the system is not able to answer it. So you add like a query refiner because user doesn't know how to write prompts and they're not supposed to be. So you need an extra step where it actually translates the user question into such a manner that the LLM would actually understand it. So you add a new part, it tends to work a little bit better, but then you still see that it still has gaps because user started asking something about real-time things. But LMs have been pre-trained, years ago. And if you're going to ask it, like, what's the day today, it's going to tell you like 2024. So you see that actually you need like an access to Google search or whatever. So you add it like on the top, and it's an endless game. It's really so strongly depends on your use case. That's why we have systems where it looks like a single input output, but like under the hood, you have like 20 different optional parts, which are like moving all the time, like around. And like, hopefully you don't need that complexity, but you're only going to figure it out when having like a human in the loop, just going with the real user, seeing how they're behaving and trying like to improve it. So it's important to know what you can add to improve and just not throw like, but as well important not to throw everything at the beginning, because you may be just overcomplicating things. It can be, you're going to have bad latency, you're going to have something very expensive, but maybe you can have something simpler. That's why you start with the most basic baseline, and then you just try improve your performance within the limitations of your latency and your cost. And that's how we work on every project. We try to solve your problem as simple as possible. It has to be good enough within your budget, and then like from there we can go. Maybe we can make it even better.
With each company being that AI company, they now have power in their hands to create something custom. What I've found a lot, especially among non-technical people, is the desire to just use an out-of-the-box solution. But I don't know about you guys, but I've been in spots where I'm like, this thing does X, Y, and Z, but it misses A through every other letter. Or it does this thing really well, but it doesn't do these other things. So this is a sign for whoever's listening to this to actually build something custom. It doesn't have to be you coding. It could be as simple as getting with someone who knows how to build an agentic workflow, or help you use different models on a workflow. And there's so many tool options. So you can check our newsletter to get some of the ones we recommend, and know if you need to build a custom solution, but don't just use these out of the box platforms that are going to waste your time and have security vulnerabilities, especially just ChatGPT basic, because based on what you guys told me, AI assistants could soon become the biggest advertising platforms ever. Jurgis, why do you think this is going to be the case?
Well, it's simple. ChatGPT and the rest, they feel personal. They feel like you use it every day. You use it probably more than Google at this point, and it always tells you the right answer. It looks up the things that you need, and it feels like it actually cares about you, even though it we all know it doesn't, but it feels like it. So it's only natural that you start asking it for recommendations, and those recommendations right now, well, it's hard to say whether they are being personalized or not, but I would assume that it's a matter of time, and that time is very short, because there's already terms that, we had SEO, search engine optimization. The new term right now is AI optimization, AI search optimization. I don't think that the term has actually landed, but it's getting there. Because if you can place your product or even your company, because it's not only products that we're talking about, but also, things to do for a weekend, things to do, what to do on a date, gift ideas. We're talking about, it's not only a list of 50 things to get your dad, and it's like, a cup and all those, all useless gifts. We're talking about personalized experience that ChatGPT has the information about you because you talked about it with ChatGPT, and they collect all that information, I can tell you that. And based on that, it will recommend you a product. And if your product is optimized as if it was optimized for search engines, it will show up, and it will show up as a single answer. It's not going to be, 20 pages of just Google search. It's going to be, hey, based on your interests, this is what you might like. So it's a huge opportunity to place your products there.
Yeah. Yet another reason from a business perspective to not be on the platform, because there always comes a time where Facebook has to add ads. You're like, oh, this is the best thing ever. Be Real. I don't know if you guys ever used it. It was like really popular around like 2020, 2021. And everyone's like, this is the best thing ever. I can just connect with my friends. Then they got bought and started adding ads. It happens. And ChatGPT's been kicking the ball down the road because they know once they do that, they're going to lose some users, but they're also going to make a lot of money.
But I mean, you need to be profitable one way or another. That's, as well, a lot of news, like how do companies have such low prices having like such huge models? Because that's, if you're going to look into finances, like a lot of companies are losing money on serving like LLMs, because indeed it's getting cheaper to acquire more and more clients. But like up to like at some point it has to stop. At some point they have to start thinking about return of investment, and that time is coming quite soon, because like it gets more popular, but the more popular, the more money they're losing. So they need to earn from somewhere. And even looking at the example of a Google, I mean, Google search is free, but if you think technically, can you imagine how much money does it cost to run Google, to like crawl through billions of web pages? So like the question is, how can you get so much money that you can have a Google? And the answer is ads. If you're going to look at Google, 80%, like around 80% is kind of like of profit is coming from ads. And like the same thing has to come from from the LLMs, because whether they need to make like 10 times more expensive pricing, but then they're going to lose like most of the customers, because people get used that you have free versions, you have like cheap prices, and you can't just do like extend. But the other thing, you can start adding affiliate links, product placement, a little bit biased like recommendations. And then like everyone is kind of happy, because it has unmatched advertising power, because you have trust, you have personalization, and you have like constant presence, because like people are dumping all their thoughts, all their things like in there. So this is, I mean, it's coming for sure. I'm pretty sure like something basic is already like, on Amazon, where it starts like recommending you like with the links from Amazon. So it's coming for sure, and everyone's going to adopt it, because it's just too big of a market not to.
Yeah. If you want to be the first to know when things like ChatGPT adding ads, or the latest models, or how to actually make the most of the models that are available through things like Divide and Conquer, use the first link in our description to get on our newsletter. This is where we share bi-weekly insights with practical ways you can implement AI. Jurgis, Vitalijus, great episode. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.